So this is what we're going to cover this morning, with the decline of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and what kind of contributed to that and why it happened in a way, to understand that this morning. Even those two kingdoms here that were divided and split, yet they still failed, eventually wind up failing in what they were supposed to do. So we're going to talk about that this morning. As you see, we're going to talk about when Israel was deported, the exile that they had to go into exile, when they were in exile, and then while they were in exile, and then also why Israel returns, when they return back to the land. Quite a bit of territory to cover here, and that's why I wanted to split it up and give us time so we're not really rushing too much on some of this stuff. We'll rush through a lot of it. So you have a chance to look here, and you'll see the references I've got here. This morning we're going to be in 1 Kings and 2 Kings this morning, of course. We'll get there in a moment. So you have an idea if you want to kind of read ahead. You can kind of read ahead for the first section there about 2 Kings chapters 24 and 25. We're going to touch on Daniel, part of Daniel, and Jeremiah and Lamentations, of course, next week. So that kind of gives you an idea of some of this, where if you want to read ahead on any of this. And I kept thinking about that, hopefully to make it more available for you to what to read ahead on, so you'll know. Okay? Any questions there? You know, I split these lessons up, and that's so I can cover it a little bit differently for you. All right, so this divided kingdom here, their decline. Generally, overall, for both of them, this is a quote from Norman Geisler's book, A Popular Survey of the Old Testament. I think he sums it up pretty good here, how it's summed about these two kingdoms, what happened with them in a sense. The moral decadence, as you see here, the moral decadence that began under Solomon. And you think, well, Solomon was the wisest king, was he not? But what did Solomon do that brought down the southern kingdom? He what? Well, he had many wives, and among those wives were not good wives, were they? They brought in all their idolatry with him. So that brought in danger to the southern tribe, of course, the southern kingdom, of course, to them. So the decadence began with Solomon, led to the division, because, there was division, of course, of the kingdom. After Solomon's death, there was division, okay? So we have two kingdoms here, between Jeroboam and Rehoboam, which in turn led to the continued deterioration of the monarchies of Israel and Judah, and eventually to their deportation because of this. But all through that time, God had given prophets to warn them, to stop them from doing what they were doing. And of course, people didn't want to listen to it. Some did along the way. Some kings tried to. You'll see that. We talked about that last week a little bit, that table I showed you about the kings from the north and the south, of course. Some good kings were where were the good kings at? Where at? Judah had good kings, right? Not all of them, but they had some good kings in there. Of course, the northern kingdom, Israel had none whatsoever. All bad kings, of course, and what they did. We're going to talk about that as we go through this what happened to them, of course. So during the time, God gave a lot of prophets. You see a lot of the prophets are mentioned here. Now, prophets we talked about last week, of course. There was prophets, of course, before the monarchy. Before that, in the time of the judges, of course, Samuel was a prophet. There was prophets then. But as it got more and more into the divided kingdom, you start seeing more prophets showing up, and more what we call the writing prophets. The major and the minor prophets that we have, the books that we have in our scriptures there, of those writing prophets are in there. So that started taking place. So moving on. You have this if you have the handout here, and I'm going to turn around to this thing and look at it here. I divided so you see my normal timeline, as you've seen this many a time, that you've seen here. So now the divided kingdom, there's the southern kingdom, which is Judah. Here's the northern kingdom, which is Israel. And the reason it's laid out this way, because who's the first one that goes into captivity? The northern goes into captivity first. They go into captivity by the Assyrians. So that's one section here. We'll talk about that in a moment here. The other one is the southern kingdom. They go into captivity when the Babylonians came and took them, of course, a few years later on. So that's how it's laid out here for you. But if you see below here, it talks about some of the writing prophets, Obadiah, Joel, Amos. You'll see Jeremiah, Lamentation, the books of the scriptures that we have approximately when they were written during these time periods for them. And I know this sounds like a lot of technical stuff. I understand it. A lot of history and all that kind of stuff. But you need to understand, when you understand the Old Testament, to see how it all relates together. I think it helps you to understand that and not put you to sleep. All right, let's go on. Here, you should have this handout. This is the other handout I gave you here. And it has the handout here. It has for the, when I had the, my sheets here, get them out of the way. Is the northern kingdom first. We'll talk about the northern kingdom because they're the ones who go into captivity first, okay? I laid this out a little differently for you to see this time-wise. I think it helps to understand that. What you see there, and we'll talk about that, is see those real red squares that you see there, and they're all numbered. You see a little reference box down there at the bottom, right down here. Well, all of that, each one of these is each one of these kings. These are what? The northern kings? And they all are what? Bad. They're all bad kings, right? All did evil. And the phrase that I was using here, and it's towards the end of the book, or the conclusion, I'll get to that in a moment, is that phrase, that which was done, which was evil, where? In the sight of the Lord. This is what was referenced to each one of those four. And that's what those references are down here, is that phrase, that which was evil was in the sight of the Lord. Okay, we'll talk about that towards the conclusion of this. But I wanted you to see the big picture about these kings here, about what took place. Okay, so any questions about this chart? Hopefully it's clear enough to see. I tried to give you an idea of their time, the dynasties. We're just talking about the dynasties here, from the decline from the dynasty of Jehu, and after his dynasty going downhill from there. It all went downhill, but it gradually went more so. It kind of like accelerated downhill for them at this point. Okay? The 5 dynasties. This is the handout that you had the other week that I think was given out to you, probably a couple of weeks ago. You should have this handout. But I took this part of this, talk about these 5 dynasties for you. Okay? Get this out of my way. If you see here the 5 dynasties, they're down here. Here's Jehu's, here's Shalem, if I say it right, Menahem is right here, Pekah right here, and then Hoshea was down here. Yes? Oh yeah, but this is the last ones of that. This is the last of these dynasties. See, I'm just picking up from here down. Remember in the slide, the handout I gave last week has all the other ones, of course, the other dynasties. All right? I'm just trying to show you towards their decline, their rapid decline from this point on. Okay? Any other question? Oh yeah, there's more dynasties because there are, what? You're down to 9 dynasties here. I'm just showing from 5, dynasty 5, down to 9. There's others, of course. We talked about that previously. Any other questions? I'm going to give you a quiz on this. I mean, y'all need a quiz. Y'all need something here. I mean, I don't know. I know it's a lot of information, but I want you to understand how it ties together. It helps you in the scriptures to understand as you go through. Some of y'all probably have a Bible that has tables in it, has maps in it and all that. Well, this is kind of like that, trying to help you kind of grasp all this together for you, hopefully. But here's these last 5 dynasties of the northern kingdom we're addressing right here. Okay? And I try to put the prophets that were involved with them particularly there. So moving on. So the decline of the northern kingdom. Jehu, the first king in this 5th dynasty, the 5th family. Because dynasties are what? They're made of families. Okay? Every family is a dynasty, so that's multiple. So what in the southern kingdom had how many dynasties? Southern kingdom had how many? Dynasties. How many did the southern kingdom have, which is Judah, had how many dynasties? One family that ruled the southern kingdom. All right? The northern kingdom was run by different families, different dynasties. And as you noticed, back it up for a second. Back it up for a second. How did they get their position? Well, he assassinated the person ahead of him. These persons inherited. This person, he assassinated this one. That's how some of the assassinations were taking place. Kill the first one off, then the next one would take over. That's how that was happening there. Okay? These are these kings from the north, what they were doing. So down to this slide here, okay, it's about Jehu. If you see here, God foretold about, through Elijah, 20 years ahead of time about these events to take place. 20 years ahead of time was told by God to Elijah what was going to be taking place. So if you want to turn there, 1 Kings chapter 19, about this prophecy. Chapter 19, verses 15 through 17. And the Lord said unto him, Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Now this is a different kingdom to the north, and Hazael's the king. He's going to agitate these people. He's going to constantly be an agitation, a thorn to Israel. And Jehu, he says, and to Jehu, the son of Nimshah, shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Zaphat, of Abimeliah, shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. So that's going to be, he's talking about, the Lord said, you're going to anoint this person to be a king, Hazael to be a king, you're going to anoint Jehu to be a king, and then you're going to have, who's going to follow you? Elisha is going to be the next prophet behind you. Okay? And it came to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Now God already promised, God already stated what was going to happen. Okay? Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. Okay, and down in verse 21, chapter 21, verses 21 through 24. 21, let's get there, chapter 21, down to verse 21. We'll pick up verse 17. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Arise and go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, which is in Samaria, and behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, whether he is gone down to possess it. And thou shalt speak unto him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Hast thou killed and hast taken possession? And thou shalt speak unto him, saying, Thus saith the Lord, In the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick the blood even thine. And Ahab said to Elijah, Hast thou found me, O mine enemy? And he answered, I have found thee, because thou hast sold thyself to work evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring evil upon thee, and will take away thy prosperity, and will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. And will make thine house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah, for the provocation wherewith thou hast provoked me to anger and made Israel to sin. And Jezebel spake also spake the Lord, and of Jezebel also spake the Lord, saying, The dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Him that dieth Ahab in the city of dogs in the city the dog shall eat, and him that dieth in the field shall the fowls of the air eat. This was a prophecy that God was telling them. This is what's going to take place to them. He gave this prophecy to Elijah. It was going to take place. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to point out here, this prophecy. Because with Jehu, things are going to really start going downhill even more so. It's already been downhill previously with these other dynasties, but it's going to start going worse now. Okay? And if you see here, I guess you probably already read all the note there, but it says, God had foretold about Elijah 20 years before that such a time of punishment would come to this house, the house of Amri. And that's not showing up there. The house of Amri is not showing up there. But that's the house that's going to be destroyed by Jehu. Okay? And of that house of Amri, just like that dynasty of Amri, is Ahab's family. He's part of that family there. Okay? What did Ahab do? What did Ahab do that's being addressed here in this passage here?
Killed
Naboth. Remember, he whined and cried because he wanted the vineyard of Naboth. And of course, his great wife helped him out, and she had him killed, Naboth killed, so Ahab could get that property next door. And he had the guy who was innocent, had him killed for his property. So God things don't get past the Lord, I assure you. They don't get past him at all. And he's judging him for that, okay? So moving on. So when Jehu became the king, he was ruthless when he became the king. And these are some of the points here that I think you need to see about what he did initially. So if you have to, turn to 2 Kings chapter 9. 2 Kings chapter 9. 2 Kings chapter 9. We'll talk about chapter 9 and chapter 10 as well. So you see here in chapter 9, if you jump down there in chapter 9 and verse 16. And in the 5th year of Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being then king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem, and he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and did the house of Ahab, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David, his servant's sake, as he promised him, to give him always a light unto his children. And in his days, I'm in chapter 8. I knew that didn't read right. It didn't sound right to me. Yeah, it didn't sound right when I was reading all this. I'm in the wrong chapter. I'm looking at chapter 9 over here. I'm in chapter 8. I'm sorry about that. So chapter 9, down to chapter 9 and verse 16. Yeah, thank you. So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. He had been sick, trying to recover. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. And there stood a watchman on the tower in Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came, and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send to meet them, and say, and then let him say, is it peace? So there went out one on horseback to meet him, and said, thus saith the king, is it peace? And Jehu said, what hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, the messenger came to them, but he cometh not again. You understand what happened? A messenger was sent out to ask Jehu, are you coming in peace? And Jehu says, you better get behind me. And the messenger never came back. Then it says, then he sent out a second on horseback, which came to him and said, thus saith the king, is it peace? And Jehu answered, what hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, he came even unto them and cometh not again. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. And Joram said, make ready. And his chariot was made ready. And Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out, each in his chariot. And they went out against Jehu and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And remember, the prophecy was in Naboth's area where the vineyard was, about what was going to take place. And it came to pass, when Joram saw Jehu, that he said, is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, what peace? So long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many. And Joram turned his hands and fled, and said to Ahaz, there is treachery, O Ahaz. And Jehu drew a bow with his full strength and smote Joram between the arms, and the bow and the arrow went out of his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Then said Jehu to Bedkar, his captain, take up and cast him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how that when I and thou rode together after Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. I'm going to jump down here. Look down in verse 27. But when Ahaz, the king of Judah, saw this, after he saw what? He saw the killing of this one king. This other king, Ahaz, is fleeing away as quickly as he can. And he said, and Jehu followed him after him and said, smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going up to Gur, which is by, I'm going to skip Abelium. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, because he was the king from where? He was the king from Judah. He was killed also. So he's taken back to Jerusalem. So moving down here, verse 30, and when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her face and tired her head and looked out a window. And as Jehu entered in at the gate, he said, had Zimri peace? Who slew his master? And he lifted up his face to the window and said, who is on my side? Who? And there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs. And he said, throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled in the wall and on the horses, and he trode her underfoot. Remember the prophecy that was going to happen to these guys and to Jezebel. And as you see this list up here, he goes through each one of these things taking place. But I want you to see this list. I'm not going to read everything through here. But see this list as he goes through. He goes to Jezebel. He kills Jezebel. He goes to Ahab's 70 sons. He sends out a message to the town where they're at. And they kill his sons, Ahab's sons. All his sons cut their heads off, pile them up there as an example. All his sons were killed. Also, you see here, all the officials in the capital were killed. Anybody had anything to relate it to Ahab and then were killed off. And in doing that, 42 of relatives were killed also, of Ahab's were killed off. It keeps going on, and all the prophets and priests of Baal in their temple. He kind of tricked them in, hey, I want to worship with you. And he had them all come together in their temple and all that, and got them all in there. Then he had 80 of his guys kill them all. So he had them all killed. But I want you to see this part of what he did, all this taking of these lives of what he did. But unfortunately, he took out too many people. He took out all the officials that he needed, people that he could use some help with on some things. But he took them all out, just taking everybody out of here. So moving in light of the extensive slaughter by Jehu of even viable leaders to help him during his reign, there were infringements of foreign powers into Israel. Remember Hazael earlier, of the king of Syria? He comes attacking him, impacting on his kingdom. And does also the Assyrians force Jehu to pay tribute as well. So things are changing up for them. Things are getting worse for them. That's what I'm trying to point out to. And moving on, the decline of the northern kingdom. You see this here, the decline, if you look in 2 Kings chapter 17. 2 Kings chapter 17. 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. I did this little illustration to show you here, trying to explain this part about what's happening here. This going into Assyrian captivity by these people who were kings at the time. 17, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was what? Evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy at Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. And in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed him in Hela and in the harbor by the river of Goshen and in the cities of the Medes. The point here is that you see that Shalem, remember that dynasty I showed you? Their dynasties, the gradual decline taking place here. And they're eventually going into Assyrian captivity that took place. Any questions on that? All right. So moving on. The southern kingdom, the decline with the southern kingdom. Okay? After the captivity of Israel by Assyria, which, to the north, they're taken into captivity. Can you imagine that? Somebody coming, say here in America, and we got Canada to the north. Somebody comes up and takes Canada in captivity. Right on our borders right there. That's what was happening here. That was what, just across the border is what was taking place there. They were taken in captivity. And the Assyrians were known to take them away to other lands, what they were doing. And they were very ruthless people, of course. The Assyrians were, of course. But as it says here, there was problems for the Assyrian Empire. Judah was experiencing problem with the Assyrians. Just because the Assyrians had taken the northern kingdom away, it wasn't like, okay, we're going to leave you alone down there. Judah, we're just going to leave y'all alone. No, during the time, they kept affecting Judah as well. Okay? So that's what I'm trying to point out here in 2 Kings chapter 19, if you turn there. 2 Kings chapter 19 is a very familiar story that you know of. 19, where I'm at, chapter 19, verse, make sure I'm in the right chapter. Okay, I'm there. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt in Nineveh. This is when the king of Assyria had come to conquer Judah. But you know what? The Lord says it's not happening yet. It's not going to happen by you. And what did the Lord do? The Lord sent, the angel went through the camp and killed them all. 185,000 of them were killed. Judah didn't have to, none of Judah had to do anything. They had to do any fighting. But part of that was because of what? For the king Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was a man who was a good king. And you know what he did? What do you do? He asked the Lord for help. Yes, brother.
He eventually shows the Babylonians all his household and all the treasure and stuff, which basically brings the wrath of Babylon.
Yes, that's correct. He does that. He kind of like this ambassadors come from Babylon, and he says, hey, come look what I got here. I mean, come look in my house. See all the possessions I've got, what I got in here, The Lord said you shouldn't have done that. But one thing he did do, which was right, is that he went before the Lord and asked the Lord for help, what to do. With these Assyrians right outside of them to take them, he asked for the Lord's help, and the Lord did what? The Lord helped them. When the situation seems impossible, and it was, this large army, the Lord helped them with this. Even because this great empire was coming against them, the Lord helped them through all of this. What went too fast on that? Here is the table for the other side, which I'm picking up right here. These are the kings, which they had 19 kings for the southern kingdom. And here's Josiah, and here's his sons, and his grandson, here's his son here. So this is just showing you here that what's happening after Josiah. Josiah was a good king, of course. And his sons were not good. His grandson was not good. So with the session of Josiah, Judah entered her closing period of history. No longer was there any reason to fear Assyria, for Ashurbanipal. I'm not good at these names. Last year's witnessed little military activity, and only weak rulers followed him until Nineveh fell in 1612, and Babylon was instrumental in helping that to fall. There was a shift in power taking place here. What I'm trying to show you here too is that, went up too far. Let me back it up for a second. I meant to show you. Josiah was a good king, did good things to help Israel. But when his sons took over, that phrase again, they did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. How did you like that labeled on you? That was the label that you had for you. That was labeled on them, what they did. Okay? Over. Skip that. Here's in that handout that you had there. Here is Hezekiah, who was a good king. Manasseh served 55 years, of course. Ammon just goes on. Here is Josiah, and here's his sons. See the little red things here? There's none under the good kings. It was the bad kings that had that, who did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's what I'm just trying to point out to you. There's a constant decline. So getting to the end here, we're almost to the end here for you. The decline in the southern kingdom. This clash, I know this is a bit of history for you, but it does come in 2 Kings chapter 23, if you want to see that. In 2 Kings chapter 23, we'll be there in a second. The clash of the Babylon and the Assyrian Empire up here, the battle of Carchemish on the Euphrates. And I was trying to show you here, is the battle was up here, and here's Babylon, and they have a battle up here, and the Egyptians come up there to fight. Of course, the Egyptians didn't win. And that opened up everything for the Babylonians to come down. And the Babylonians came down all the way down. Came down conquering everything down there, all the way down to Egypt. Doesn't show it on here, but that's what happens. Because the Egyptians had gone north, they didn't win. The Babylonians come south, and they took over everything. The Babylonians had already conquered the Assyrians. Okay. So the conclusion here. That phrase, that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Just that part of that phrase, I looked it up just to see, because I kept seeing it over and over about these kings. And it was done, it's not the only phrase, like that particular phrase. There's another phrase called evil in the sight of the Lord. That's used 44 times in the scriptures. But of these times, I chose this phrase, kept seeing it. Where is it being used at? Which kings is it being used? Who's it involving here? What kind of label is that to have for a person? For the final thing in the scriptures is evil in the sight of the Lord. Do any of them think they were trying to do something that the Lord couldn't see, couldn't know that they were doing to hide from Him? Turn to 2 Kings chapter 17. 17. We were there earlier. We're coming back to it here. 2 Kings chapter 17. This is the Lord's statement. I know it backs up. I'm just backing up for a little bit. But I think it's an interesting statement from the Lord about Israel going into captivity and why they went into captivity, which eventually, of course, Judah went into captivity, of course. But I want you to see this where it says in chapter 17, verse 7. For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and the kings of Israel, which they had made. Now let me stop right there. Have you not, if all the series we've gone through, all these lessons we've gone through, do you not remember that phrase that kept going on that the Lord brought up? It just kept showing up time and time again, was this other phrase. The phrase here about, not so much as the phrase, but the whole gist of this, which had talking about sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt. Remember we talked about that, how important that was, an important event that was always showing up, always being referred to at different times because of the hand of the Lord, what He had done for them, and how the people still did what? Okay, you gave us freedom. Okay, we're on our own. We'll do what we want to do again. We're just going to do what we want to do. But this phrase here about being brought out of Egypt, I think is important to understand. The Lord showed His hand and what He had done for them to bring them out of the Egyptians, who were what? They were their masters. Or were they not? So moving down through here, and walked, and we've talked about that verse 8, let's go to verse 9. And the children of Israel did secretly those things which were not right against the Lord their God, and they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. And He set them up in images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree, and where they burnt incense, all the high places, as did the heathen, whom the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. And they served idols, whereof the Lord said unto them, Ye shall not do this thing. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, Turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. Notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks, like to the neck of their fathers, that they did not believe in the Lord their God. Let's stop here for a second. The Lord has said what to them? He sent them prophets to tell them to do what? Don't go that route. Do not do those things. And what were they still doing? I don't want to hear you. I don't want to hear you, Lord. I'm going to do what I want to do. They just want to harden their hearts and do what they wanted to do. By God's graciousness, that He was very gracious and kind in so many ways, trying to get their attention. Because eventually they're going to be, and this is what's happened with the Assyrians coming and taking and deporting them. It was going to happen to Judah as well. Because they still refused what? Refused to listen to the Word of God. How are we like that? Can we be like that? Can we become like that? The preacher preaches to us and tells us things that we need to know. And so, oh, that sounds good, but that's for somebody else. That's for them over there, or that's for them over there. It's not for me. I'll do what I want to do. I got my own high places that you don't know about. I got my own things that I do that you don't know about, but I'm going to keep doing my things. But you know who does see them? No matter if I can't see it, we can't see everything what you're doing. But the Lord knows what you're doing. He knows all that, okay? He knows what's going on. You can't hide that from him. And they thought they could do things that the Lord wouldn't know and wouldn't even care about. But they still do those things. So let's move on here. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he had made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the heathen and their round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them, and that they should not do like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. And Judah wept. Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel, which they made. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel, and afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of the spoilers, till he had cast them out of his sight. And he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord, and made them sin a great sin. For the children of Israel walked in the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They departed not from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of his own land to Assyria unto this day. It's pretty tough stuff, isn't it? Pretty tough stuff the Lord's talking about them. They would not change. They would not do right. They kept doing what they wanted to do. And it led to what? It led to them being carried away into captivity. I think it's a warning to everybody to understand when the Lord says things, he's not just saying it just to say the words, and he wasn't just saying these things, it just sounds good. He's saying to help them to do what's right. And they still chose not to do what's right. Anybody have any comments, any questions? That's the last of this. Last slide. You're done a little bit early. I know you're excited. Oh, we're done early. Anybody, anything? Can we learn from this? Can we learn anything from this, what we've seen, what happened to them? The people that were called by the Lord, were used by, were protected by the Lord, He done so much for them. What about us? The Lord does so much for us. What do we do in serving Him? All right, let's go, Lord, and pray, and we'll be dismissed.